Hello, everybody, and welcome to Better Together Tuesdays. This is episode 7, I believe now, and I'm your host, Joel Barrett. I'm a business development consultant at the Missouri Small Business Development Center at UMKC, and together we're going to make business simple even in complex times like these. And this webinar series is in response to the many questions that we began receiving on a daily basis from small business owners across Kansas City and the Missouri region and beyond, especially during the whole COVID-19 thing. But these topics apply to things beyond COVID-19. These are evergreen videos that will be posted as a library of information on our YouTube channel, which is not quite ready yet, but be watching. Otherwise, they do live on Facebook right now. And we'll just take these topics and then be able to share them with other clients and things as they come through, because they are evergreen topics. We started with a quote that we read. Our executive director, Carmen, said that surviving and thriving in a crisis is rarely a solo event. And that was by Shelley Seifert from the First Bank in St. Louis. And that thought just resonated with us of we can't do this alone. Being in business is not an isolated island kind of event. You've got to have people there with you. And so we want to make things better together. We're going to divide today's 30 minutes into 3 segments. They are not equal segments, but we'll take a little bit and talk about focusing, then we'll talk about innovating, and then we'll talk about engaging. So we're going to get started. The topic that we chose for today is about having an exit strategy for your business. And that wasn't just a random choosing. It came from my experience with a lot of my clients right now who are suffering because of the shutdown. And a lot of them are trying to figure out what is next. What does the future look like? And I've had to tell a few of them, you may want to start thinking about an exit strategy. And that can be a really uncomfortable topic for many people, because it kind of feels like, well, am I just planning for failure instead of success? And we're going to talk about that today. But I want to unpack the subject with 2 small business owners who both had the experience of owning a business and developing the exit strategy and using it. And so I want to start by introducing my colleague, Jill Hathaway. She also works for the Missouri Small Business Development Center. And Jill, tell us a little bit about yourself and the business that you exited.
I was a banker by education, and actually through marriage evolved into a retail shoe store in Kansas City. So I owned 4 retail shoe stores in Kansas City since 1998 to 2014. And those were comfort stores that evolved into family and then high-end women's shoe stores. And I love your statement, Joel, about the exit strategy that we had planned. We'll divulge and work into that one a little bit later, right? There was no plan. So I actually didn't know what I didn't know, and closed in 2014, took a class at the SBDC that Joel actually facilitates now, but not at the time. And they asked me to contract, and I've been with them now for 5 years. And I took a class because I didn't know what I didn't know, and I needed to realize and understand why I had to exit my business.
That's awesome. And now I can say with great assurity that Jill knows an awful lot.
Yeah.
And I rely on her heavily for insight and feedback on things. We also have with us today Henry Graham, and Henry oftentimes has presented in our Elevation Lab New Venture class about this very subject. So of course he was the first person that came to mind. In fact, usually we'll have him on the first day of class to kind of just knock the bricks out from underneath people for a few moments before we start building them back up. So Henry, tell us a little bit about you and the business that you exited.
Yeah, it's interesting that you use me to scare people away. So I need to remember that. Yeah, I spent the first 30 years of my working world in the corporate world in information technology. And after 30 years, I was given the opportunity to permanently adjust my work-life balance. And I went into all life and no work. I was laid off. And at that point in time, I said, you know, I want to take advantage. I've always wanted to have a small business. So I did go through the New Venture program. And ended up opening a high-end quality European chocolate store, a retail outlet. It was a franchise. We ran it for about 3 years. And in the end, although the customers that we had absolutely loved us and we got rave reviews, we didn't have enough customers. And I didn't want to continue to run a charity program for my employees. So we ended up closing it. And the reality is, and maybe it's because of my background in corporate world and what I kind of did for planning, my wife and I actually went into it very deliberately with an exit strategy and knowing how we would know when it was time to close the business. And unfortunately, we actually had to use that.
That's good. And that's right into the first focus question, which you both have kind of hinted at. Henry, you answered it right there. The question is, did you go into business with an exit strategy, or did you develop it when it became evident you needed one? It sounds to me like you had the one going in, correct?
Yeah, and just again, the reality, because we, after 30 years, I have 401ks, I have retirement funds, those type of things. And we made a decision at the very beginning that we wanted to run a small business, but we would not risk our long-term retirement in order to do that. So we said, what do we have available to us right now? How much could we spend and invest in this business before we would say, no, it's too much? And again, we're going to get to this, but that to me is, if you have those type of data points up front, I think it makes it easier to understand later on when you might need to exit.
So Jill, it sounds like you did not have those data points up front. So tell me about how you came about to realizing, oh, I need an exit strategy.
You're correct. I did not have the data points, nor did I have an exit strategy. I had very much a lifestyle business. This was a business that it took care of personal household budget. It took care of, the business bills and that, but there was no future of what that business looked like. It wasn't a hobby. It was definitely a lifestyle, something that I was passionate about, did very well, profitable business, until it didn't become profitable any longer. And that's where you have to weigh. And I appreciate Henry's comment that having that exit strategy ahead of time. What does your household need? What do you need out of your business? Do you need to pull out of your business, for personal use? And initially we did not, but eventually we did. And then also we went through 2008 and 9, got out of that successfully, and involved, truly it was cash flow, too much debt, not enough sales, and not having that strategy in place. We had to look at our savings and time frame and understand how much longer can we drain the pot before we were bleeding to death. And, ended up putting a time frame on that to stop it and cut the cord, actually just severed the cord, all within about a 3-week period. So
what did that feel like?
That's a twofold question, but Joel, it felt great actually, because as I said, we owned our businesses for about 20 years. So I had raised 3 children, was pregnant, had 3 children during the course of that, and had some familial issues that I wasn't privy to because I was in retail. So when you're in retail, you work 7 days a week through the evening, on the weekends, extended hours, depending on the development that your retail business is at. And I wasn't involved with my family as much as I needed to be as a mother. Same thing, that was not something that where I thought it was going to be. So when we made the decision to close the business, we actually had somebody who was interested in buying it because they wanted to open up a shoe store. And I'm like, well, let me do the math. Okay, here's one available. It took about 1.5 years to go through those figures, but it didn't evolve due to her lack of funds. But when we closed the business, it was a relief. I was able to go see my children's games. I was able to sell everything in the store within a 3-week period, everything. I was down to 12 pairs of shoes left in the store. It was awesome. All the fixtures, everything. Pair everybody off and walk away, lock the door and walk away. I see my customers every day in the Kansas City market, and they're like, Jill, are you going to open up another retail store? The answer is no, I will not. Or I see them, and Henry, you could probably attest to this. I know you've moved, but they're like, oh my gosh, I need to come see you. I need a new pair of shoes. And now it's become a joke, or I say, well, thank you so much. You didn't see me for 20 years, and now I've closed my business. So shame on you. So it's, it wasn't difficult, and it was a beautiful chapter in a life, and now I know a lot more to share with clients of what not to do.
That has really informed your counseling, I'm sure.
Yes.
Henry, does an exit strategy feel like embracing defeat, and why or why not?
For me, it didn't at all. In fact, it made me feel better going into it, more confident. Again, I think part of what we're trying to accomplish up front is to identify all the risks that we can identify, and then say, and how are we going to address those risks? So for me, it was just another item on my checklist to say, okay, when do I get out? What will the data points be? And by the way, I don't want to come across saying had everything laid out and boy, I knew exactly what was going on, but because obviously I didn't know enough to know we weren't going to have enough customers, but those data points I did cover. So I get it that people can say that, but I think it's unrealistic to go into a business and not say, you know what, it might fail, or we might face challenging times. So I would say that if you're concerned it's not going to look good because I'm not all in it, and boy, if I'm not 100% committed to it, it's not going to work. I think you just better be more realistic and say a lot of businesses don't work and there's valid reasons. So I don't think you should fear that somehow you're defeating yourself up front by planning.
Any comments on that, Jill?
I agree wholeheartedly. Once you make that decision, it's your decision and it's your business and it's your livelihood and your family. And although you love the relationship with your clients and your customers, if they love you back, they understand that completely. One of my favorite authors is John Maxwell. And right after I closed, I read his book, Failing Forward, which was it made me feel good because that's exactly what had happened. I failed forward as long as we learn, from what we do.
One thing I'd just like to follow up on what Jill said, and I would just second it, is I was surprised at how much of an emotional impact it had on me to close the business. Always before I'd worked for someone and their name was on the outside of the building, right? Not my name. And yet when it's your own business, it was more emotional to me because I had a personal connection. So I hadn't planned for that. I was really surprised at how difficult it was emotionally. Even though we had laid it all out, that was a big deal.
What would have been the worst case scenario if you had not exited when you did? Henry?
For me?
Yeah.
Well, eventually we would have run the bank dry and we would have to have breached our savings, our retirement savings. So that was the next step. I mean, because we knew upfront how much cash we had. We knew what our sales were. We said, if it ever gets to this level, we got to start planning to close. So it would have altered our future lifestyle, and we just weren't willing to do that.
Jill?
Yeah, same. Bankruptcy. Cash flow issues. Absolutely.
As you look back now on this experience, before we get into the next section of this, what would you say is the biggest lesson you learned? Either one or the other.
I mean, because I consult with it now, and I know Henry does some consulting as well too, is numbers don't lie. Numbers don't ever lie. And that's what I talk to my clients all the time with. And when you have a very good month, you have a very good week, a very good month, stick with your budget. There may be a little bit of play in there, but stick with your budget because if I had a really good month, then I would get online and order more shoes because they were things that I thought my customers would want. And maybe it worked, maybe it didn't, but it was taking money out of the profitability of the business, which needed to be left in the business. So really understanding your numbers and your cash flow with your business and having a budget to follow.
Yeah, and I would just add, and again, I agree with Jill, but something that I didn't do that I think was a huge lesson at the end was every contract that you enter into, every lease, every vendor you have a relationship, when you're establishing that, you're so focused when you're opening on your business, consider what happens if you have to sever that relationship, if you have to cancel that contract, if you have to end the lease. I didn't give that thought. And then at the back end when we're starting to close, although we knew what the parameters were when we would close, we never got to think about, well, wait a minute, we just signed a 5-year lease. Mm-hmm. And what does that mean? What if I have to get out of the lease? Or I have a commitment with my supplier that I'm going to buy X amount of goods every month. So to me, one of the biggest lessons was everything that you enter into, say, how do you exit out if you have to?
That's a great segue into innovate, which is what can we do differently now and in the future. So if I understand you right, Henry, this would be a sit down kind of conversation with whoever's in your business with, also looking at all of your creditors, just looking at every account and saying, okay, if I need to exit at some point in time, what do I need to be thinking about? Is that a good summary of what you just said?
Yeah, absolutely. And you have to be somewhat careful up front because in negotiations, because you don't necessarily want to go into your people and say, I really don't think I'm going to make it, but will you do business with me? But at least in the back of your mind, be aware of that and maybe consult an attorney, maybe consult an accountant or someone and say, how would I get out of this if I think that's just critical. Or you're setting yourself up for some really expensive surprises in education.
Jill's kind of already touched on this, but to both of you, what are the financial warning signals that a business owner should be looking out for in regards to this moving forward? You're going along in your business, and sometimes people honestly overlook the red flags because you're just too close to the forest to see the trees. So what would you say are the financial warning signals? We'll start with Jill.
Negative in your bank account. No, I don't know if that ever happened. Actually, Joel, you just touched it. Having a banker background, I was too close to the numbers in the sense of goals. Sales had to be daily, weekly. To touch on what you just asked, Henry, and something you would do different, I had an amazing banker who was my mentor, and I would definitely surround yourself with professionals that you can, SBDC consultants, bankers, attorneys that you can consult with and mentors, in the industry and or in like businesses that you admire. Because those are people that, we feel very isolated on this island alone as an entrepreneur, and we're juggling all the balls and doing everything ourselves. And having that banker to tell me, Jill, you're doing great, or you're doing better than, John down the street, especially in 2008 and 9, when you feel like you're doing awful, was at least gave you that extra little boost that, okay, good, I'm doing okay, I'm not so bad. Because otherwise you don't have somebody to weigh your business with or against. And I forgot what your other question was, Joel. Oh, financials or monies. So I was too close to the day-to-day, the sales, daily, weekly, monthly. And it was my banker that opened my eyes to, don't look at it that close. Look at the big picture, look at quarter. We can adjust things by, within a month easily, but we can adjust things by quarters. So don't get into it because you're driving yourself crazy, and I was driving my employees crazy too.
Yeah, it's almost a form of living paycheck to paycheck at that point because you're looking at each day. Mm-hmm. So Henry, do you have anything to add to that?
I invested heavily my time and expertise in developing a business plan. So I had really pretty much laid out what my sales should be. Mine was a very seasonal business. And so I wasn't, yes, I was looking day to day, but I was more about how much do we make in the Christmas season or the Valentine season. But because I invested so much time and compared to other chocolate stores with data that's available, I kind of knew what we should be making, at least at a seasonal level. And so it became quickly clear within about 6 to 9 months that we were not tracking anywhere close to where our plan was. And so that's, to me, when the signals really started coming in. We said, well, maybe just because we were a first year, but then a second year, we were still lagging significantly. Yeah, I watched the financials, the sales, but again, you watch day to day, but it was more to me about the season. How did we do for the season?
So to both of you right now, we have a lot of businesses who are struggling because of COVID-19. Do you have any advice for the business owners that are struggling specifically because of the shutdown and the loss of business? Any particular advice for them?
I think it's something Henry and I both just touched on, and Joel, this is close to your heart because you teach this, is validating what you're doing with your customers. Joel teaches entrepreneurial mindset training, and that's the class I took after I closed. And that was just eye-opening. In fact, one of the books that he references is Diana Cantor's All in Startup. And it's truly, you have an idea and you open up a store. I mean, you get the website, you hang the sign, you open the door, and you're like, hey, we build it. Where are they? Where are they? And not until, granted, it was sweet for several years, a decade, 12 years, but at one point it was like, wow, I never really validated if there's women in Kansas City that can afford my average price point, and how often are they going to buy, and how often are they going to buy here locally? And you touched on this, Henry, with seasonality. Are they going to buy when not in season? So talk to people. Don't be afraid to talk to people during COVID, especially now, because mindsets have changed. People are thinking differently than they were, 2 months ago, 3 months ago. And we need to validate consistently. Is this something that solves a problem for them? Is this something that they're going to spend time and money to purchase?
Yeah, and I would just add, great comments, Jill. I would add, again, this is my bias, but I say now more than ever, if your business is impacted by the COVID-19 virus and shutting down, is stop right now and say, how much am I willing to lose? How much of my time can I give? What are the contracts I have? And just make an assessment and say right now, okay, I'm fine. I can ride this out another 6 months. I can't imagine not having that type of data in discussion. And now's the time to have it. I mean, you should be able to lay out on the table, say, I have this much cash, I have this much commitment, this much inventory, I have to pay the rent. How long can I make it? And know what your number is. Just know your number.
Yeah, I just talked to a client today and asked that very question. I was like, so how long can you go before it's too late? And he didn't really know the answer to that. He gave me
one other thing I would just add is, and when it's appropriate, reach out to those people you do have contracts with and leases with, and just let them, because they may offer something up. You don't know. So, but first know your number.
I'd like to clarify too that, when we talk about this exit strategy, it sounds so official using the word strategy, but what I'm hearing from both of you is it's really just being aware of the cash flow of your business, how money's coming in and out, customers, so on and so forth. I want to encourage our listeners not to be overwhelmed by this strategy word that we're going to have Venn diagrams and all of that kind of stuff. It's really not that complicated, is it?
No.
Well, we could draw you in the Shikara diagram to make you feel better, but no, it's not a strategy by any means. It's, what's at next door?
Yeah.
I would just say it's a component of your business plan and your business on a monthly basis. It's just another component.
Yeah, it is. And I'm finding myself encouraging people to think about this more than ever, because I think if we've learned anything from COVID-19, that things can be rolling along just fine. And then something can completely come out of the blue that has nothing to do with how you've been running your business or not running your business. And it's like in the time of crisis, you don't want to then first start having to think about this. Like, there's so many moving parts right now with people navigating PPP loans and EIDL loans and so on and so forth, and unemployment, that it probably feels very overwhelming to also be thinking about how long am I going to do this? So take advantage of the time when the stress isn't there to think through these things. Mm-hmm. Business, which kind of leads me, this is kind of a non-question in light of what I just said, but business owners that are doing fine right now, what would you say to them?
How can they help anybody else? How can they get more involved in the community? Help with other businesses, be a mentor to other businesses. And then I would say still be aware, because I do have clients that are actually doing really well due to not only being an essential business, but maybe they have a product or service that was needed during COVID. And what they're actually seeing now is maybe a decline in sales. So understanding, same thing, that ebb and flow. You may not have needed funding during COVID timeframe, but do you need it after the fact to continue that business forward?
That's good. Henry, anything to add to that?
I'm going to take a real evil turn here. If your business is doing really well right now because you happen to have an angle, I would say, remember, this creates huge opportunities. And I would look out there to say, are there other businesses like yours that you could potentially buy out, partner with, shift your business, expand what your business product line is. So if I was doing well right now, I would really be out there looking for those opportunities to expand and take as much ground as I could during this particular crisis without being mean-spirited or rude or taking undue advantage.
Oh, I don't think that comes across
I
that
had
way.
to add that at the end.
Okay, let's talk into the final segment of this about engaging where we can learn more from. Jill, you talked a little bit about this, about getting the right kind of people surrounding you. So I guess to rephrase the question is, who can help me as a small business owner navigate this kind of what we're talking about today? Who are those people?
I mean, the SBDC has been great, of course. You know, I'm a little biased, but, you know, definitely the bankers. Actually, Henry, too, I loved your point about the vendors. That was one thing that when my cash flow was lower, they appreciated the communication. So I really do agree that to reach out to your landlord, to your vendors, and communicate to them, not just during COVID, but even just during poor times or seasonal issue times, that, you know what, things are a little bit slow. I'm doing the best I can. I will pay you a little bit here and there, versus being completely blank and not talking to them. They will be more upset with you and cut you off at that point. So just continuing those relationships. And then of course, other business owners like Henry or myself.
Yeah, I would say too, it's and Jill referenced this earlier, it's so important to have mentors, other business owners, whoever it is. And I would really be discussing this with them, and don't get such tunnel vision, because as Jill said, you can start looking so close you can't see the forest. So have someone that can remind you what the forest is, and ask them for what their input is.
Good advice. I appreciate that. And I agree with Jill that the SBDC is here, and we are available to do one-on-one coaching, counseling. We also have a partner in this, and that's KC SourceLink. And KC SourceLink exists to get you connected to the resources that are available in the Kansas City area. So make sure that you take a look at that. I did fail to pull up my websites ahead of time, so I'm just going to talk about them verbally. But Henry, I would like for you to kind of wrap this up by saying, we know what Jill's doing right now, but what are you doing now after the chocolate, post-chocolate?
Yeah. So what I say all the times in the classes, I could have gone to the Wharton School of Business for less money than it cost me to learn all this stuff from losing my business. But I did feel like I learned a lot, and I've been able to turn that around. And I find a lot of small business owners, they're good at what they do, but they're not good at the business side of it. So I find that I can actually come in as a consultant and help them enhance their business plans. Or maybe they want to expand and they want to make a business case to a bank and say, this is why we need the loan. So I spend a lot of my time right now helping small business owners really do that more formalized data collection and business plan development, and just expanding what their ideas and how they could apply that.
That's awesome. Great. Jill, you want to add anything to what you're doing now?
I'm working as hard as I ever have, because all the small businesses are contacting us and calling us, which we greatly appreciate, because that's why we do what we do. And I wake up every day, you know, be it at home virtually now or at the office, and love what I do. So sharing, you know, and as you guys can tell, I'm very open and honest, as Henry is too, you know, sharing the experiences that we've gone through, because we don't want businesses to make the same mistakes that we have.
Well, thank you both, to Jill and to Henry, for being on Better Together Tuesdays. I really appreciate your insight, and I know that everyone listening is going to learn a lot from just thinking through these things. We do have a topic next week that kind of is a good tie into this. We're going to talk about establishing an e-commerce website. So one of the things that a lot of businesses have had to do they've had to pivot and figure out, oh, how can I do what I'm doing by doing it online instead of in person? So we're going to talk a little bit about that next week with a couple of experts in that area. I think I've got 2 or 3 people on. So we'll look forward to that. I want to thank KC SourceLink for partnering with us on this project of Better Together Tuesdays. Any final words, Henry or Jill?
Stay strong, small business on.
Yeah, I would just say there's always a way. There's always a way to keep going.
Well, this is Better Together Tuesdays. We're doing it together. We're here for you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today.